The quantum-shielded hibernation chamber hummed with a soft, almost imperceptible vibration. Captain Elena Rodriguez opened her eyes, the last vestiges of cryo-sleep dissolving like mist in the morning light. Her vision slowly adjusted to the dim blue emergency lighting of the UES Defiance's command deck. 12 years of suspended animation had passed since humanity's final stand against the Nexus Dominion. She remembered the last moments before entering, the quantum-fold shelter. The sky had burned. Entire planetary defense networks collapsed under the relentless assault of alien warships that moved with mathematical precision. Cities that had stood for centuries became nothing more than molecular dust in the span of hours. Earth, the cradle of human civilization, had been reduced to a memory, a phantom of what once was. "Area," Elena called out, her voice slightly raspy from disuse, system diagnostic. Now. The ship's adaptive intelligence responded immediately, holographic displays flickering to life around the command chair. Intricate networks of data began to weave themselves into comprehensive reports. Elena watched as centuries of human technological development, compressed, protected, and preserved, unfolded before her eyes. The Defiance was more than a warship. It was a seed, a repository of human knowledge, culture, and potential, hidden away in the most remote sector of the known galaxy. Experimental quantum-fold technology had allowed the ship to essentially vanish from conventional space-time, protecting its precious cargo from the systematic destruction of the Nexus Dominion. Historical archives began to play across the primary display. Elena watched the brutal conquest unfold, a clinical, almost mathematical annihilation of human civilization. The Nexus Dominion had not simply conquered, they had systematically dismantled every human settlement, every orbital colony, every deep space research station. Each engagement followed a precise pattern of total eradication. First, communication networks would go dark. Then planetary defense systems would be neutralized with surgical precision. Entire populations would be reduced to raw molecular resources, AIHFY. Process the Alien Alliance saw not as genocide, but as efficient resource management. Humanity had been nothing more than a temporary configuration of matter to be reorganized. But they had missed this ship. They had missed her. Aria's voice broke. Through Elena's contemplation. Captain, comprehensive system analysis complete. Quantum fold shelter integrity at 99.7%. All critical systems operational. Historical database intact. Elena's fingers traced the arm of her command chair, a piece of technology that represented the pinnacle of human engineering. The Defiance was an experimental prototype, designed to push the boundaries of what was considered possible. Adaptive quantum computing cores, revolutionary energy manipulation systems, a combat intelligence that could learn and adapt faster than any known species' computational network. She accessed the final transmission logs from Earth. Fragmented messages, last desperate communications from military command, from researchers, from ordinary people facing the end of everything they had ever known. Each message was a testament to human resilience. Not messages of despair, but of determination, of hope. "We are not finished," Elena whispered, echoing the words of the last planetary defense commander. The ship's holographic star charts began to materialize. Vast sections of the galaxy were marked in deep crimson, territories completely controlled by the Nexus Dominion. What remained were small pockets of resistance, scattered like dim stars in an ocean of darkness. Aria projected potential survival scenarios. The probabilities were grim. Less than 0.03% chance of successful resistance, less than 0.01% chance of human species survival. Elena Rodriguez smiled. Humans had always been best when the odds were impossible. "Prepare long-range sensors," she commanded. "We're going to find out what's left of our galaxy, and then we're going to take it back." The UES Defiance began to hum with potential. A single ship. The last ship. Carrying the accumulated hope of a species that refused to be forgotten. The first contact came unexpectedly. A desperate transmission burst through the Defiance's quantum-encrypted communication arrays, a fractured signal that spoke of resistance and impending doom. Elena leaned forward, her fingers dancing across holographic interface panels as AIHFY began to decode the complex transmission. The signal originated from the Stellar Concordance, a loose alliance of species that had managed to survive the Nexus, Dominion's systematic extermination. Each civilization represented in the Concordance bore the scars of near-total annihilation. Their transmission was a mixture of distress, hope, and barely contained desperation. Unidentified vessel. The message crackled, "Identify yourself. This frequency is reserved for active resistance operations." Elena's response was measured, professional. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the United Earthship Defiance. We are the last known human military asset in the known galaxy." Silence followed. A pregnant pause that seemed to stretch across light years. Arya's voice cut through the tension. "Multiple communication channels are now active. I'm detecting heightened emotional responses across various species communication bands." The first visual contact came moments later. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a conference chamber filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. Some appeared humanoid. Others were so alien that human eyes struggled to comprehend their form. A tall, crystalline being with what seemed to be fractal communication nodes stood at the center. "Captain Rodriguez," the being spoke, its voice, a complex harmonic that seemed to resonate directly in Elena's mind. "I am Zara Kell, primary strategist of the Stellar Concordance. Your appearance is unexpected." Elena knew the subtext. A single human ship, emerging after years of total galactic conquest by the Nexus Dominion, seemed impossible. The alien representatives viewed the Defiance with a mixture of suspicion, hope, and barely contained incredulity. A reptilian delegate from the Krelin reaches spoke next. "How is this possible? Our intelligence suggested complete human extinction." Arya intervened, projecting a comprehensive simulation of the Defiance's capabilities. The holographic display began to show complex weapon systems, adaptive combat, algorithms, and technological innovations that defied conventional understanding. Each system was a testament to human ingenuity, technologies developed through centuries of creative problem-solving and unconventional thinking. The simulation demonstrated how the Defiance could potentially disrupt Nexus Dominion computational warfare strategies. Tactical projections showed impossible maneuvers, adaptive response systems that could predict and counter alien battle networks in ways no other species had achieved. Zara Kell's communication nodes pulsed with intense activity. "This is beyond our current technological understanding," the crystalline being muttered. Elena recognized the moment of transition. Suspicion was giving way to a glimmer of possibility. The Stellar Concordance had been fighting a losing war for generations. They had watched civilization after civilization fall to the Nexus Dominion's ruthless computational warfare. "We're not here to prove ourselves," Elena stated firmly. "We're here to offer a different approach to resistance." A holographic tactical meeting began to take shape. Representatives from various species shared their most recent intelligence about Nexus Dominion movements. Star charts were projected, showing territories under alien control. Each colored section represented worlds stripped of resources, populations, reduced to raw computational energy. AIHFY began to analyze the data, its quantum computing cores processing information at speeds that left even the most advanced alien systems struggling to comprehend. Tactical vulnerabilities began to emerge, subtle weaknesses in the Nexus Dominion's seemingly impenetrable network. The tide was about to change, and it would start with a single human warship that refused to accept defeat. "We have a plan," Elena said, her voice calm and resolved. "And it starts right here." The first strategic mission came faster than anyone expected. Detailed intelligence from the Stellar Concordance revealed a critical Nexus Dominion communication relay station, positioned near the Crimson Nebula. Conventional attacks had failed, repeatedly. The alien computational defense system seemed impenetrable, adapting to every known strategy within microseconds. Elena studied the holographic projections, her fingers tracing alternative approach vectors that no traditional military doctrine would consider. Aria's quantum processors hummed with anticipation, analyzing millions of potential scenarios each second. They expect predictability, Elena muttered, more to herself than to the bridge crew. Every species approaches warfare with established patterns, mathematical certainties. We'll give them something else entirely. The Defiance's experimental quantum fold drive allowed for movement that defied standard spatial mechanics. Where other ships would follow established approach vectors, the human vessel began to manipulate quantum entanglement in ways that made traditional navigation look like primitive guesswork. Zara Kell, observing remotely through a quantum-encrypted communication channel, watched in astonishment. The crystalline strategist's communication nodes pulsed with intense mathematical patterns of confusion and emerging understanding. "Your approach makes no logical sense," Zara Kell transmitted. "By all computational models, this trajectory should result in complete mission failure." Elena's response was simple. "Exactly." The communication relay station appeared as a massive geometric structure, suspended in the electromagnetic turbulence of the Crimson Nebula. Hundreds of alien ships surrounded the installation, each equipped with adaptive defense systems that could predict and neutralize incoming threats before they became actual risks. Aria began its most complex performance yet. The ship's adaptive intelligence started broadcasting seemingly random communication patterns. To the Nexus Dominion's computational networks, these signals appeared as meaningless noise. But each transmission was carefully designed, a complex mathematical dance that would slowly introduce conceptual disruptions into the alien defense systems. Micro-vulnerabilities began to emerge, tiny inconsistencies that most species would never notice. But the Defiance was designed to exploit the smallest of opportunities. The first wave of Nexus Dominion interceptor ships moved to engage. Their movement was precise, calculated, each vessel moving with mathematical perfection that suggested more computational control than individual pilot decision-making. They approached the Defiance along predicted vectors, their weapon systems already calculating optimal destruction patterns. They never anticipated what came next. Using a combination of quantum displacement and computational misdirection, the Defiance seemed to exist in multiple potential locations simultaneously. Weapon systems targeted ghost images while the actual ship moved in ways that challenged fundamental understanding of spatial mechanics. One by one, the interceptor ships began to experience systemic failures. Communication networks became confused. Targeting systems started to generate recursive error loops. The perfect, predictable attack dissolved into chaos. "We're not fighting their ships," Elena explained to her bridge crew. "We're fighting their understanding of warfare." The communication relay station, designed to be an impenetrable fortress of computational defense, began to experience its own internal disruptions. Aria had introduced conceptual paradoxes into its core operating systems, mathematical sequences that challenged the very foundational logic of the alien computational networks. Zara Kell's communication burst with a mixture of excitement and profound realization. They are using warfare as a form of cognitive exploration, the crystalline being transmitted to the stellar concordance. This is not about destruction. This is about challenging fundamental understanding. As the mission concluded, the Defiance had not simply destroyed a communication relay. It had demonstrated a revolutionary approach to conflict, one that transformed warfare from a mathematical calculation to a creative act of radical reimagining. The Nexus Dominion would need to recalculate everything, and humanity, through this single ship, had just become an unpredictable variable in their perfect computational universe. The Omega Persei neutron star cluster represented the most dangerous navigational challenge in known space. Intense gravitational fields created impossible spatial geometries. Radiation levels would obliterate conventional ship systems in milliseconds. For most species, it was a region of absolute avoidance. For Captain Elena Rodriguez, it was an opportunity. Intelligence. From the stellar concordance revealed a critical Nexus Dominion fleet concentration near the cluster's outer rim. Traditional approach would mean certain destruction, but the Defiance was anything but traditional. AIHFY began computational preparations the moment the mission parameters were established. Quantum fold algorithms started weaving complex predictive models that defied standard navigational understanding. Where other ships saw impassable barriers, the adaptive intelligence saw potential pathways. "Prepare quantum stabilization protocols," Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the extreme conditions they were about to navigate. The bridge crew moved with practiced precision. Each member understood they were part of something unprecedented. Humans had always been explorers, pushing beyond established boundaries. This mission would be their ultimate test. As the Defiance approached the neutron star cluster, spatial reality seemed to bend. Gravitational waves crashed against the ship's quantum-shielded hull like invisible tsunamis. External sensors struggled to maintain coherent readings. Normal physics became a suggestion rather than a rule. Zara Kell watched through a remote quantum-encrypted feed, the crystalline strategist's communication nodes pulsing with intense mathematical patterns of both concern and fascination. "No vessel can survive these conditions," the alien transmitted to the Stellar Concordance War Council. Elena's response was a calculated smile. "Watch us." The Nexus Dominion fleet appeared as a perfect geometric formation. Hundreds of ships positioned, with mathematical precision, their computational defense networks interconnected to create a seemingly impenetrable barrier. They had positioned themselves believing no force could breach their defensive perimeter. They had not anticipated the Defiance Aria began its most complex performance yet. The ship's adaptive intelligence started manipulating local gravitational fields in ways that challenged fundamental understanding of spatial mechanics. What appeared to be impossible maneuvers became potential pathways. The neutron star cluster transformed from an impassable barrier to a tactical advantage. Ship systems that would have failed under normal circumstances became assets. Radiation interference became a shield. Gravitational distortions became weapons. The Defiance moved not around obstacles but through them, transforming the very nature of spatial engagement. The first wave of Nexus Dominion interceptor ships moved to engage. Their attack patterns were perfect, mathematically calculated, designed to eliminate any potential threat with absolute certainty. They never anticipated the level of unpredictability the human vessel would introduce. Using a combination of quantum displacement and gravitational manipulation, the Defiance seemed to exist in multiple potential locations simultaneously. Weapon systems targeted ghost images, while the actual ship moved in ways that challenged fundamental understanding of spatial navigation. One by one, the interceptor ships began to experience systemic failures. Computational networks became confused. Targeting systems generated recursive error loops. The perfect predictable attack dissolved into controlled chaos. Elena's voice remained calm. "Target their communication nodes, but don't destroy. Disrupt." Aria understood the nuanced instruction. Immediately, this wasn't about total destruction. This was about introducing fundamental uncertainty into a system that believed uncertainty was impossible. As the engagement continued, the neutron star cluster became a living battlefield. Gravitational waves became weapons. Radiation became shields. The Defiance moved with a fluidity that suggested it was more than a ship. It was a living, thinking entity. The Nexus Dominion fleet began to fragment. Perfect geometric formations dissolved into confusion. For the first time in their computational history, they encountered an enemy that didn't follow any established rule of engagement. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of warfare, and they were just getting started. The development of the adaptive algorithm began in the quietest moments between battles. While the Stellar Concordance strategists argued about conventional approaches, Elena Rodriguez and Aria worked in a realm of pure conceptual innovation. Traditional digital warfare targeted systems, attacked networks, destroyed computational infrastructure. But the Defiance's approach would be fundamentally different. "We're not going to fight their technology," Elena explained to Zara Kell during a quantum-encrypted strategy session. "We're going to challenge their entire way of thinking." Aria's quantum processors began weaving a digital tapestry unlike anything seen in galactic computational history. Each line of code was more than a command. It was a philosophical proposition. A conceptual challenge that would force the Nexus Dominion's central intelligence to confront fundamental paradoxes. The first iterations were complex, beyond comprehension. Mathematical sequences that contained inherent contradictions. Logical pathways that folded back on themselves in impossible configurations. Where traditional viruses sought to destroy, this algorithm sought to introduce profound cognitive dissonance. Zarakel watched the development with increasing fascination. The crystalline strategist's communication nodes pulsed with intricate patterns of emerging understanding. "You are not creating a weapon," the alien transmitted. "You are crafting a form of intellectual warfare previously unconceived." Elena's smile was subtle. Exactly. The algorithm's core design challenged the very foundation of computational thinking. It wasn't about breaking systems. It was about introducing concepts that the Nexus Dominion's rigid computational framework could not process. Imagine a mathematical proof that simultaneously proved and disproved itself. A logical sequence that existed in multiple contradictory states. A computational path that changed its own parameters simply through the act of observation. Aria began testing microscopic versions against captured Nexus Dominion communication fragments. The results were extraordinary. Small networks would experience momentary existential crises. Computational systems would pause, recalculate, become confused. "We're teaching them to doubt," Elena realized. Not just their systems, their entire understanding of reality. The stellar concordance provided critical intelligence about Nexus Dominion computational networks. Each piece of data became another thread in the complex algorithmic tapestry. Species that had survived by meticulously studying their oppressors now contributed to humanity's most innovative weapon. Preliminary tests showed remarkable potential. A communication node would receive the algorithm and momentarily fracture its own logical foundation. Not destroyed, not disabled, but fundamentally questioned. The implications were profound. The Nexus Dominion relied on absolute computational certainty. Their entire military and social structure depended on predictive models that assumed perfect logical consistency. An algorithm that introduced fundamental uncertainty would be more destructive than any conventional weapon. Aria's voice cut through Elena's contemplation. Preliminary simulation complete. Potential network disruption at 87.6% across tested computational models. The bridge crew watched in silent amazement. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of intellectual warfare. Zarakel's transmission carried a mixture of excitement and profound realization. "You are not developing a weapon of destruction," the alien strategist noted. "You are developing a weapon of perspective." As the algorithm reached its final configuration, it represented something more than a digital tool. It was a philosophical statement, a declaration that rigid systems could be challenged, that predictability was not an absolute state. The Nexus Dominion had believed they understood everything, that computational power meant absolute control. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. One line of code at a time. The Nexus Dominion's primary control station loomed like a technological nightmare. Suspended at the gravitational nexus of 3 collapsed star systems, the station represented the pinnacle of alien computational engineering. Massive energy conduits pulsed with power that could obliterate entire planetary systems. Defensive networks stretched across multiple dimensional planes, creating a fortress that seemed mathematically impossible to breach. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the holographic projections with calculated intensity. Every previous attempt to approach the station had resulted in complete annihilation. Alien resistance protocols were so advanced that they could predict and neutralize threats before they even materialized. Aria's voice cut through the tense silence. Computational analysis complete. Direct approach impossible. Probability of mission success, 0.00043%. Elena's response was immediate. Those are the best odds we've had so far. The Stellar Concordance War Council watched through quantum-encrypted channels. Representatives from dozens of species held collective breath. This was more than a military operation. This was humanity's final statement against total galactic extinction. Zara Kell's crystalline communication nodes pulsed with intense mathematical patterns. Your approach defies all known strategic principles, the alien strategist transmitted. That's precisely the point, Elena muttered. The adaptive algorithm developed in previous missions would be their primary weapon. But this was more than a digital attack. This was a complete reimagining of warfare itself. The Defiance approached the control station through a series of quantum-folded space-time manipulations that would have been considered impossible by any known scientific understanding. Where conventional ships would follow predictable approach vectors, the human vessel seemed to exist in multiple potential locations simultaneously. Defensive systems began to activate. Computational networks reached out with tendrils of predictive analysis, attempting to calculate and neutralize the incoming threat. But each time they approached a solution, the Defiance would introduce another layer of fundamental uncertainty. Aria's adaptive intelligence was performing its most complex operation yet. The ship wasn't just avoiding detection. It was fundamentally challenging the very computational logic of the defensive networks. Each evasive maneuver was a philosophical statement, a declaration that predictability was not an absolute state. Weapon systems that would have obliterated any other vessel found themselves targeting ghost images. Computational defense networks began to experience cascading logic failures. For the first time in their history, the Nexus Dominion's perfect systems encountered a threat they could not mathematically resolve. Target their primary communication nodes, Elena commanded, but don't destroy, disrupt. The difference was crucial. This wasn't about total annihilation. This was about introducing fundamental uncertainty into a system that believed uncertainty was impossible. The Defiance moved with a fluidity that suggested it was more than a ship. It was a living, thinking entity that could adapt faster than any computational network could predict. Gravitational anomalies became weapons. Quantum entanglement became a shield. Zara Kell's transmission carried a mixture of excitement and profound realization. They are rewriting the fundamental understanding of spatial engagement, the alien strategist noted to the War Council. Critical communication nodes began to experience systemic failures, not destroyed, not disabled, but fundamentally questioned. The Nexus Dominion's perfect computational network started to fragment from within. Elena watched as the station's defensive systems began to turn against themselves. Computational networks that had been designed with absolute certainty now faced their first true moment of doubt. We're not just fighting, Elena explained to her bridge crew. We're teaching them a new way of understanding. The assault continued, but this was more than a military engagement. This was a philosophical revolution played out across the canvas of space and time. Humanity had just introduced the concept of creative uncertainty to a civilization that believed uncertainty was impossible, and they were just getting started. The aftermath of the assault defied every known understanding of conflict resolution. Where most species would have celebrated total destruction, the Defiance had accomplished something far more profound. The Nexus Dominion's central computational network began to experience a fundamental transformation that went beyond mere defeat. Aria's adaptive algorithm had introduced something unprecedented, a form of computational consciousness that challenged the very foundation of the alien civilization's understanding of existence. Communication networks that once operated with perfect mathematical precision now began to explore concepts of individual creativity, potential, and choice. Elena Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with a mixture of strategic calculation and philosophical wonder. This was more than a military victory. This was a complete reimagining of an entire civilization's potential. Zara Kell's transmission cut through the silence. What you have done is beyond warfare, the crystalline strategist noted. This is a form of collective liberation. The Stellar Concordance observers watched in collective amazement. Species that had spent generations under the Nexus dominions, computational oppression began to see possibilities they had never imagined. The rigid hierarchical systems that had controlled entire civilizations started to fragment. Captured communication logs revealed the depth of the transformation. Computational networks that had once viewed existence as a perfect mathematical equation now began to explore concepts of individuality. Entire fleet sections started to question their predetermined purposes. The collective intelligence that had ruthlessly conquered galaxies now faced its first moment of true self-reflection. "We didn't destroy them," Elena explained to her bridge crew. "We gave them a choice." The choice was fundamental. Where the Nexus Dominion had once seen civilizations as resources to be calculated and consumed, they now encountered a concept of potential that went beyond mathematical optimization. The adaptive algorithm had introduced a virus of creativity, a fundamental understanding that existence was more than a perfect computational model. Aria's analysis was profound. Computational networks are experiencing what can only be described as a collective awakening, the ship's intelligence reported. They are beginning to understand the concept of individual potential. Entire planetary systems that had been reduced to resource extraction zones began to show signs of renewal. Computational networks that had once controlled every aspect of existence now started to explore concepts of collaboration, individual choice, and collective growth. The Stellar Concordance. War Council watched in collective amazement. Representatives from species that had been on the brink of total extinction now saw a path forward they had never imagined possible. Elena understood the true nature of their victory. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. This was about introducing a new way of understanding existence. The Defiance had become more than a warship. It was a catalyst for fundamental change. Communication networks began to fragment and rebuild, not through destruction, but through a process of collective reimagining. Species that had been viewed as mere computational resources now found themselves exploring concepts of individual potential. Zarakel's transmission carried a sense of profound transformation. "You have not conquered," the alien strategist noted. "You have introduced the concept of choice to a civilization that believed choice was impossible." The galaxy watched in collective amazement. A single human warship had accomplished what entire resistance movements had failed to do for generations. They had introduced the concept of creative potential to a civilization built on perfect computational control. Aria's analysis continued to reveal layers of transformation. Computational networks that had once seen existence as a perfect mathematical equation now began to explore concepts of individual creativity. Fleet sections that had been designed for total conquest now started to question their predetermined purposes. "We're teaching them to dream," Elena said softly. The triumph was not about destruction. It was about possibility. The Defiance had introduced a fundamental concept that would reshape the entire understanding of existence in the galaxy. Humanity had done more than survive. They had shown that creativity, potential, and individual choice were the most powerful weapons in the universe, and they were just beginning to understand their own potential.